Hi friends, welcome to the 12th episode of Walking with a Himalayan Master, and we are reading chapter 2, which is Building an Institute. So let me start. In 1971, I went to Chicago for a retreat led by Swamiji. There, Swamiji instructed Dr. Arya, a traditional Hindu Pandit and scholar, to perform an ancient ritual for me. He conducted a ceremony during which I was ordained a Pandit in the Himalayan tradition and given the name Achala, meaning mountain man. Swamiji added the title Yogi. Yogi Achala's Twin Cities Yoga Society and Dr. Arya's new Dhyana Mandiram meditation center continued to draw hundreds of Minnesota students to study the ancient science. As a result of Swamiji's experiments in Minneapolis, a group of scientists began meeting on a regular basis to explore the significance of his work. Requests for demonstrations before the scientific and medical communities continued, and Swamiji traveled to New York City, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Dallas, Honolulu, and San Francisco to speaking on all aspects of yoga. Europeans also wanted him back. Initiate groups were flourishing, eagerly awaiting his visits. Swamiji continued his experiments with the scientific community. Once he swallowed a vial of strychnine before a large professional audience to show the power of mind over matter. Two doctors were so stunned as he downed the poison that they collapsed. When the audience inquired what it tasted like, Swamiji casually answered, "Well, it tastes rather bitter." In the ensuing months, Swamiji strongly considered establishing his headquarters at Minneapolis, but since he was quite sensitive to people's emotions, he discerned that one of the teachers whom he had accepted as a student was afraid to lose students to him. So he decided to set up his American headquarters in Chicago instead. Chicago and Minneapolis became his regular loop and his usual residence, the Holiday Inns, which saw him so often they issued him a lifetime gold card. Swamiji's lectures in Chicago were often sponsored by John Schwartz, a successful realtor in his large office on the north side. Sometimes someone else would make a store front available. Swamiji never complained, even when fewer than 20 people attended. He accepted whatever was sent to him. Chicago was slow to realize who it had in its midst. But Swamiji projected an ebullient energy that took advantages as well as obstacles in stride. When he entered a room, it became filled to overflowing with his presence. Children loved him. Running to him for hugs, those not usually affectionate were drawn to touch his hand or put their arms around him. After every talk, the room was full. No one wanted to leave. Near him, one felt that nothing was impossible. The unimaginable would take merely a moment to achieve. He always kept his students aimed to the future by working in the present. "One day you will have everything you want," he assured us. The Chicago group kept expanding with new students. Dr. Lard Koresh, Brunette Eason, Jackie Hornberger, John and Millie Frischel, Lydia Smith, medical college students, both Protestant and Catholic clergy, were also showing a keen interest in Swamiji's ideas. Rudy Ballantyne, a frail young physician from the south, had gone to India to meet a teacher and there had heard of Swami Rama. After months of searching, Rudy finally met Swamiji in New Delhi just as Swamiji was returning to America. Rudy then returned home to study with the great yogi he had sought in the East. A Chicago Catholic meets her Himalayan son. In order to appreciate how yoga got started in Chicago, one needs to know about a remarkable woman. Anne Ellwood was in her 60s, unmarried and Chicago Irish to the core. She was both charming and bluntly down to earth, a hard charger in business with a great temper and equally a boundless source of understanding and compassion when one needed her. She would have swooned had she ever discovered a priest with the slightest paranormal ability, so fascinated with the supernatural was she. And found Swamiji in downtown Chicago. She had heard that a famous yogi who could control all the involuntary functions of his body and had actually welcomed the Pope to India was speaking in a Loop hotel. That's all it took. She could no more resist meeting him than she could stop being Roman Catholic. Her longtime friend Peggy shared her same interest in the numinous, so they went together. In his talk that afternoon, Swamiji told many stories of healings and had severe arthritic pain and stiffness in both her knees, so she would be able to pull herself up the stairs to the apartment above her restaurant. Her brother had installed banisters on the both sides of the stairway walls, and thought I wonder if he could heal me. After the lecture, Anne and Peggy, like two teenagers wanting a rock star's autograph, nervously approached the Swami, encouraged by her companion's rib poking, and sheepishly asked if he would consider doing some healing on her. Of course I will, he exclaimed with an impatient, could you think otherwise look on his face. How could I refuse my mother anything? Against her nature, Anne was reduced to silence. She just looked at him, he looked at her, and for the first time in this life, mother and son embraced. Peggy wanted a hug too. She was very short, very fat woman, filled to the brim with good nature. She was so excited that she burbled out, I am Peggy and I used to dance with the Beefy Babies dance troupe during World War II. From that moment on, Swamiji affectionately called her Beefy Baby, much to her giggling delight. The hours went by. Swamiji told Anne and Beefy Baby about his trainings, his parents' early deaths, his being claimed as a son by Bengali Baba of the Himalayas, and his life in an ancient monastery tucked away in the mountains. Do you remember the novel Lost Horizons? I believe it was made into a Hollywood movie. Well, that book is based upon the age-old tales and legends about my monastery. Swamiji said with a second cup of tea. He began to unfold his mission to the woman, and shared some of Swamiji's words with me years later. We discussed them often. Swamiji's master had sent him to the West to share the wisdom of the sages after decades of arduous training. It was his mission to bring this message of hope for humanity across the ocean. He had embarked on a broad, manifold assignment that first targeted a scientific community. His travels to 56 countries were to touch and transform the lives of many people, educate hospitals and clinics about holistic treatments, affect research on mind-body communication, introduce breath therapy, and inaugurate an institute to unite Western lifestyle with ancient wisdom. He was to deliver more than 200 infants and life in dozens of countries to work with students and seekers. He was to be an advisor to many business executives as well to heads of state. Nearly all of these services were to be done quietly away from the limelight. No media reporters were allowed at any of his scientific experiments. He didn't want the kind of publicity that would generate a cult status. We believed that no one project in America or Europe could hold his energy, for his vision for humanity exceeded endured any single continent, any single institution. Whether he was lecturing on higher consciousness to the communists in Moscow or enjoying high tea with the Queen of England, paving a rocky road near Uttarakashi, reading philosophy at Oxford, or acting as a marriage broker for many of his Western students, he kept in mind his master's declaration to him that he was, in truth, a prince of the universe. During his travels, his master had assured him he would rediscover many old friends and students from past lives, and they would help as well as hinder him to accomplish his worldwide task. When Anne spoke with Swamiji that day in Chicago, she wondered why it had taken her so long to find him when he asked for the help in starting the Himalayan Institute of the USA. All of Chicago reverberated with the invitation. At the moment, she had toiled for years raising four brothers. She had helped them establish a successful restaurant. She had cared for her retarded aunt. She had worked ceaselessly for her church. This powerhouse was now about to embark on a new mission in life to help her newly found son manifest the sage's dream for America. That day, Anne was named Ranima, Queen Mother, soon to be called Mama by thousands of Swamiji's followers. The weeks went by. Mama introduced Swamiji to her brothers, proudly showed the lifelong vegetarian ascetic around the family's teak restaurant, and brought him upstairs to her apartment where she lived with her two chihuahuas and her aunt Kitty. Kitty, a small, wrinkled, shy, retarded woman, spoke to no one and hated meeting anyone. But when Swami Rama entered her house, she flew into his arms and kissed him as she gently stroked his cheeks, tears streaming down her face. The Swami became a regular at the restaurant. Mama soon learned how to make his favorite drink, tilk, a mixture of boiled milk and Darjeeling tea sweetened with honey. Together in her apartment, the two of them would plan future lectures and ways to get donations to start the American Institute. At each meeting, she worked the conversation gently around to reminding him of his promise to cure her affliction. In an off-handed way, he kept reassuring her not to worry. She told her brothers about the Swami's promise, and they wished, with their street smart nodding, let her know to take it as a harmless boast, just part of his charm. One day, a few weeks after meeting Swamiji, Mama was in the restaurant kitchen checking on the seasoning in a large pot of spaghetti sauce. One of the waitresses called to say that the Swami was on her apartment phone and ran through the kitchen, wheeled around the corner, and dashed up the stairs, huffing and puffing as she picked up the phone. She and her son spoke about some business matters for a few minutes and then said goodbye. As she walked back down the stairs and looked at the banisters with shock, she had not touched them on her way up, nor would she ever need them again. Thank you very much, friends. You can recommend me some more books to read. I know my pronunciation is not perfect. I'm still working hard on it. But I assure you that I'll be reading a lot more books to you, and I'll also explain some of the parts which is very necessary for someone to understand theology, spirituality, and super consciousness. Yes, they are true gurus and sages, but they are aloof from the limelight. And as wise people have said, your energy attracts other person's energy, and there is always a sacred bond that these people don't share the knowledge without their gurus calling. So until unless they are ordered to share the knowledge, they cannot. So there are a lot of people. Obviously, everyone has to earn their own bread and butter, but it doesn't mean that a person cannot be spiritual or a person cannot be humanitarian. Yes, anyone can be. It would be better if you start doing some good deeds for the society, for the humanity, and like by helping your parents, by helping the old age, by helping students with their education, or if you have money, you can donate it to the good places, or you can feed hungry. It doesn't cost a fortune, but it will bring the inner peace to you, and I'm very sure that whatever obstacles that you are facing in your life will be reduced. Thanks a lot. Thank you for being with me. Have a good day. Bye bye.